Hello, namaste, and welcome to this third video on the topic of permutation systems. In the first video, I gave a general introduction to this topic, and I touched there upon the Advaitic system as an example of systems that express a specific metaphysical understanding. Now, in the case of the Advaitic system, this particular understanding consisted of the fact that the beginning of things is embedded in their end, a phrase from Steffi Yetzirah. Although I did not go into this then, of course the idea of mystical death is closely related to a system like this. The beginning of things is embedded in their end. Since mystical death is a topic I basically only write about, and that all my posts on Instagram are about in the end, and it's very closely related to the whole understanding of what permutation systems are about and the act of permuting is about. I wanted to just talk a little bit about this first before I continue with another system of which the name has meaning. Like in the second video, I talked about the album system. The next system is the Abba system, and the name Abba has meaning itself. So mystical death. Permuting words by means of the specific Advaitic system that I just mentioned. It shows the Kabbalist how things, that is, the subjects chosen to be permuted by it, behave in the realm of the world to come, as the prophetic Kabbalist Abraham Abulafia called it. So the world to come, in this sense, the world that is or that exists after the so-called mystical death. So I'd like to emphasize here that performing permutations like these to the Kabbalists are clearly not an intellectual exercise. So the system applied essentially replaces the observer. So as such, when the Kabbalist performs the permutation, he or she permutes with it. So permutations are a kind of alchemy of the soul. Now it's important to understand this, since otherwise the topics that I write about and talk about can come across as a mere juggling with numbers in order to find some kind of self-confirmation, which of course is that's a bit of a waste of time. So one has to remember that Kabbalists in this sense side with the Indian stance of philosophy, in that the subject matter transforms or is supposed to transform the philosopher, or in this case, the Kabbalist that performs permutations. So performing permutations should be seen as an expression of meditation. A meditation on the living numerical beings, as it's called by Steffi Yetzirah, that express the patterns of existence that I addressed in the first talk on the subject. And because in true meditation, the dividing line between the observer and that which is observed disappears, when performing permutations, the linguistic mystic fuses with the reality of the numbers. So in short, the Kabbalist does not perform permutations to intellectually understand their outcome and to then play with that or work with that, but to surrender to the powers that drive these permutations, so that they, the mystics, are purged from misconceptions concerning all division in general. So it is deep meditation. So to illustrate this stance on Kabbalah, it is useful to remember that the same practical Kabbalist Abraham Abulafia, who wrote the book called The Life of the World to Come, emphasizes the importance to go even beyond the meaning of words. So as long as there are meanings, Abulafia states, the mind will take hold of them, involuntary, and run with them, which is again a phrase from Steffi Yetzirah. And as the Mahabharata states, there aren't many things that are quicker than thought and then the mind. So it's tricky business. So Abulafia worked for this reason with groups and pairs of letters that held no meaning and concentrated on the passages of the Bible the Bible books that to us in English translation, stripped of the power of the Hebrew letters, are almost boring. It's the books that cite the generations, who was born from who, etc. And Abulafia even used combinations of letters in his books, the books that he wrote, that have no meaning. So he would intersperse that with words that have meaning, and then basically use those combination of letters to make other points that go beyond meaning. So in the context of permutation systems, the essential meaninglessness is represented by the absence of direction on the side of the Kabbalist, herself or himself, his or her replacement by the permutation system itself. So the Kabbalist then writes in the high places, as it's written in the Torah, Practical Kabbalists write a lot about the preparation before working with the letters and the numbers for these reasons. Some will tell you what to wear, which is usually spotless white clothing. Others will tell you where to perform the techniques, usually in places where you cannot be heard or seen. And others will go in depth to talk to you about how many days you should have been fasting before commencing these exercises. Again, to emphasize the importance these permutations had to the Kabbalists. So in short, performing permutations essentially, as I said, is meditation. It's done without any alternative motive. The word for which in Kabbalah is lishma, meaning for the thing itself, but also meaning for the name. Shem is the name, and hence for God. So it's done without any alternative motive besides the interaction with the numbers and letters themselves, that again themselves are meaningless because unlimited. That makes sense. Just like one should really have no motive to have in an encounter or to have an encounter with the divine, one should be basically motiveless. Otherwise, whatever happens will just be a reflection, a projection of your own needs and wants. So, of course, it becomes all a bit tricky here. Using words in retrospect to describe interaction with the divine quickly will come across as prescriptions. So already the mention of a specific intention embedded in a specific system will quickly lead to thoughts about the reasons that a Kabbalist will have to choose this particular system. As in, there will be choices and there will be alternative motives, like I just said, that there should not be. But let that be as it is. Once one's had experiences like the ones I'm trying to share through these talks and the ones that the Kabbalists write about in their books, and once one has seen how the interference of even the slightest amount of ego, and then ego in the sense of all thought, not just in the sense of a particular group of thoughts, egotistical thoughts, or however you want to call them, but the slightest amount of ego will instantly stop the flow of the experience, will change it from a receiving flow to a projecting flow. And then it becomes a completely different thing. So as it is said in Zen, the moment you talk about a thing, it ceases to be, really. It is like the proverbial finger pointing at the moon. So now, an interesting maybe to point out is that Kabbalah bypasses a lot of these problems because of their stance on the separation of the thing and the word. So in Kabbalah, the Hebrew word is seen as the thing itself, not as something that describes the thing. So this is why the moment you enter the reality of Kabbalah, the numerical reality or the linguistic mystical reality, most of these discrepancies I just talked about just drop away. One thing that might be interesting to point out in this context is that the word for intent, so the intent of the system or the intent the intent of the system itself, the word is chavana. So the numerical value of this word, when written for fascinating Kabbalistic reasons with a double vav instead of a single vav, denoting the va sound of chavana, is 87. So in Sefer Yetzirah, again, the book of formation, this number is renowned because it belongs to the word blima, meaning without substance. So hence the intent that is used in Kabbalah has no substance. It's empty. It's empty intent, if that makes sense. So as such, performing permutations is done by a Kabbalist who isn't really there, who has no ego-driven direction, and who uses an intention of a system that is absent and that is empty. So this is why Kabbalah means reception. The word Kabbalah itself means reception. The emptier the vessel the person is, the more they can receive. So taking all of this in consideration, let us move to the next permutation that I mentioned, the Abba system. So like the album system that I talked about in the second video, it is a system, the first two pairs of which, the two pairs that constitute its name, have a specific meaning. So unlike the album system, it is a system in which the two columns run in opposite direction. Most of the systems will use columns that run in opposite directions. So the one from Aleph to Tav and the other from Tav to Aleph, so in opposite direction. The album system was special because it runs in the same direction, just starting with a different letter. So the specific meaning of the name of this system, the Abba system, is father. So Abba in Hebrew means father. Now, to preclude resistance because of the patriarchal sound of the system, let me point out that Kabbalistically, the father part is just an English translation. So the series of letters that form this word do, of course, carry this meaning, but in Kabbalah it's about the numbers. And the numbers that they are an expression of carry, for the Kabbalist, much more weight. So the letters in question have the numerical values 1, 2, 2, and 1. That spells Abba, the name of the Abba system. So as such, what is translated as father really describes the movement from the one, which in Kabbalah is one and not the first, to the duality that is creation, which in Kabbalah, interestingly, is called the first and not the second, and then back again. So in a way, it's the cosmic inhalation and exhalation, or vice versa, really. First there comes the exhalation, and the return, the mystical return, is the inhalation, in which everything goes back to, yeah, in Hindu terminology, usually the mother. In Kabbalah, sometimes the mother, sometimes the father. Now, the Hebrew word for to create, bara, expresses a similar understanding of exhalation and inhalation. The numbers of the word bara are 2, 201. So we start with the 1, the onset of creation. I'm sorry, in bara, the creation itself, we start with the 2, bait. So the onset of creation is the letter bait, and that's duality at numerical value 2. Then follows the highest expression of this number within the context of the Hebrew alphabet, which is a 200. So the furthest expression of duality, that means duality until its slightest detail. And then the last letter of the word bara, to create, the root for to create, is again the 1. So creation as such entails the return to the 1. It includes the return to the 1. It cannot but return. Everything has to return, and this return in its physical expression, of course, is death, as the end of every physical life. Now, the Abba system does not so much follow the same route as the word for to create, since it does not include the step to the 200, so the minutest creation. And as such, this system shows the Kabbalist through intimate experience how the things remain on the side of the Father. So, like I said, as in the Atbash system, the system takes the Kabbalist to the realm in which mystical death is seen most clearly. So, in which it's experienced how the beginning of things is embedded in their end. So cyclical understanding of time, but also an understanding of creation where time really does not exist. The Abba system, on the other hand, shows how the things permuted by it in the other realm stay, how they stay on the side of the Father. So, yeah, I think I'll stop like this at this point, because now I'd like to do some permutations to, just to give a few examples of what the Abba system entails, and maybe use a few interesting words. But that's a completely different topic, so I'll leave that for the next video. And I hope you enjoyed this and found this interesting. And then next time we'll continue with the Abba system, and after that we'll continue to a completely different group of permutation systems. So first we've had the numbers that have meaning. Now we've had the names had meaning, and then we come to a completely different group of permutation systems that again will bring the Kabbalist a new state of meditation, a new state, a new layer, if one will, of reality to be experienced through the meditation of the systems and through the systems that are meditation. Okay, thank you. Om Mani Padme Hum.